I'm James McComb, reporting live from home in my bathrobe and slippers. Tonight, we're talking Dunkin' Polar Peppermint Coffee. Gene's here with the latest. Gene, do you copy?
The home with Dunkin' is where you want to be.
We
are
Cultivate.
Cultivate.
We are Cultivate.
Hello and welcome to Ye Olde Crime, where we discuss the funny, strange, and obscure crimes of yesteryear. I'm your host, Lindsay Valenti, and with me is my sister and co-host, Maddie Stengel.
Hello.
Hello.
Happy Sunday.
We haven't recorded on a Sunday in a while,
Not for a while, no.
like we used to, way back when.
Like we used to every Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Come rain or shine.
Well, before we get started, I just want to remind everybody that there is a sale at our TeePublic shop. You can get 35% off November 6th to the 24th. So it's a good time to order things if you want stuff for the holidays or if you want to just treat yourself. Now is a good time to do so. On that note, I'm just going to dive right into it. So
Yeah, okay.
it is Indigenous Peoples Awareness Month.
Yes, happy Indigenous Peoples Awareness Month.
So we will be discussing the Nez Perce War.
Okay.
Information was pulled from the following sources: a 2024 Distinctly Montana article by Doug Stevens, 2022 United States government article by the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, 2020 Legends of America article by Kathy Weiser, 2017 Appaloosa Museum article, 2009 Prospector, the newsletter of the Idaho State Historical Society's Junior Historian Program, aka I would love to be part of that Junior Historian Program. That sounds awesome.
Like all of these sound really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Volcano Observatory too. Like,
Right?
I'm sorry, what?
I
This
know.
whole new part of the US that I have no idea about.
2009 U.S. Army article by David Canali, 2008 American Heritage article by R. David Edmonds, Before the White Man by Kate and Sue Macbeth, 2 Britannica links, the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission article, Discover Lewis and Clark article by Joseph A. Musselman, Find a Grave, History Channel article, Intermountain Histories article by Allie Patterson, International Socialist Review article by Paul D'Amato, Minnesota Libraries Publishing Project article, 3 Wikipedia links, and a Yellowstone history article.
That is the strangest grouping of people all covering this story.
Yep.
So this was a huge war then.
Mm-hmm.
If Minnesota's talking about it in Idaho. Dang.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, let's buckle in.
Yep. And thanks, as always, to Carrie Ann for her research assistance with this episode. And links to all of these articles will be included in the show notes. We wouldn't be here without support from listeners like you. If you're interested in supporting us financially, you can leave a one-time or monthly donation over on Buy Me a Coffee or our Venmo page. Links are in the show notes. And we make a point of reaching out to send you a thank you note and stickers to show our appreciation.
Want to show your support in a more concrete way? Pick up some Ye Olde Crime merch over at our TeePublic shop. We shout out whenever there is a sale each month, and we work to make sure we're creating new designs and changing it up whenever possible. And hey, thanks for listening.
And I'm going to state at the top, I did my best to research the pronunciation for all of the names of the Indigenous peoples that are involved in this event and series of events. If I do mispronounce any of them, please let me know. Chances are I will get at least one of them wrong, so I'm trying. I feel like I did a pretty comprehensive deep dive into making sure everything's pronounced okay, but please give me some grace if I get them wrong. I tried.
Yeah, or let us know. Yeah.
so I can let people know the correct way to say it next time.
Absolutely.
The Nez Perce, or the Nimipo tribe, lived in an area known as the Plateau Cultural Area of the northwestern United States. They
Okay.
were the most powerful, well-known, and largest of the Sohapton-speaking peoples, and the name Nimipo roughly translates to "we the people."
Oh, cool. They're just known as we the people. We're just the
Yep,
people.
we're the people.
Yeah.
The name
That's awesome.
Nez Perce was given to them by the French, mistakenly believing them to be another tribe that pierced their noses, because Nez Perce means pierced nose in
Oh,
French.
funny. No, we don't have pierced noses. We're just people.
We're just the people.
We're just the people. So.
Yep, with a
Yeah.
capital T. Prior to the white man manifest destinying his way to the west, the area they call home was said to cover approximately 27,000 square miles, or 70,200 square kilometers, from the eastern slopes of the Bitterroot Mountains along the Montana-Idaho border, across almost the entirety of the southern half of Idaho's Panhandle, from Palouse River in the north to the Payette River in the south, and west to modern-day northeastern Oregon and southeastern Washington states.
Dang. That's a lot
So,
of land to maintain and manage and protect. Wow.
Today, it occupies the land between the Rockies and the Cascade Mountains, from the Fraser River in British Columbia to the edge of the Great Basin in southern Idaho and Oregon.
That's crazy. That environment too, like just being around the mountains and stuff, that you have to have quite a breadth of people too, of like being able to live in the mountains and being able to
Yep.
live in the valleys, because those
Yep.
are two very different environments at any given part of the
Yep.
season.
It's interesting
too.
you say that, because my next point is this section of the United States includes a variety of terrains, from lush
Yeah.
mountain forests to prairies, grassy ridges, deep valleys, and canyons. From the highest point in the mountains at 10,000 feet, or 3,048 meters, to the
Jeez.
lowest valley of 750 feet, or 229 meters above sea level, the Nez Perce have occupied these lands for the last 10 to 11,000 years.
That's crazy. That's so crazy. Like, it's we the people because we've just always been here.
Yep, we have been the people.
Yeah.
Different bands could be found either living in large villages or in relatively remote areas along the river. Sometimes they would be close together, and other times several miles apart. In 1800, they had more than 70 permanent villages that would be home to anywhere between 30 to 200 individuals.
So decent sized. I mean, those are pretty good groups, especially in those pretty, well, what I would imagine would be a fairly harsh environment.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't dive too deep into their everything around their culture. If you want to learn more about their culture, obviously, please check out some of the links in the show notes. But they are hunter-gatherers and
Okay.
did a lot of fishing, a lot of foraging, and it wasn't until the white man came by that they actually started more of farming and cultivating of their own crops. So,
Okay, so they were probably a little more nomadic,
yes.
potentially, like within their lands.
Yep.
Until, okay.
By 1805, when they encountered the ragged and starving members of the Lewis and Clark expedition, they were the largest tribe on the Columbia River Plateau, numbering around 6,000.
Holy smokes, that would be scary.
Yep.
Could you imagine Lewis and Clark?
Just being like, oh shit.
Either we're saved or we's about to die so fast. We are gonna get murdered so quick.
They also regularly communed with other tribes in the area, even intermarrying to strengthen the bonds between their people, primarily the Palouses and the Cayuses. They were also closely related to the Teneno and Umatilla tribes in the west.
Okay.
Not all relationships were peaceful, such as their rocky encounters with the Shoshone, Bannock, and Blackfeet tribes. But for the most part, the Nez Perce were known as a friendly and accommodating group, welcoming missionaries and government officials that would later follow the Lewis and Clark expedition, which was kind of their first.
Kind of exposure.
Yeah. William Clark noted of the Nez Perce, who they had lodged with on a couple of occasions, that they had shown, quote, greater acts of hospitality than we have witnessed from any nation or tribe since we have passed the Rocky Mountains, end quote.
I believe that.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of glean from their numbers and the sheer amount of land that they have, and the fact that they're able to control that land
Mm-hmm.
pretty peacefully with not a lot of people. There's a pretty great layer of respect, I think, in general.
Mm-hmm.
That says a lot.
Fun fact, in the 18th and 19th centuries, the Nez Perce bred what would later become the Appaloosa breed of horses, which were ideally suited for the terrain in the Columbia River Plateau after they acquired their first horses in the 1730s.
That's so cool. Because aren't the Appaloosas known for like being super gorgeous and
Mm-hmm.
huge, healthy?
They're the ones that have like the really pretty spotting, like on like their flanks and
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
In 1855, the Treaty of Walla Walla was signed and agreed upon at Camp Stevens in the Walla Walla Valley on June 11th. The document was recognized and signed by Isaac I. Stevens, who was the governor and superintendent of Indian Affairs for the territory of Washington, Joel Palmer, who was superintendent of Indian Affairs for the Oregon Territory, and 57 members and tribal leaders of the Nez Perce tribe that occupied said territories, chief amongst them being Old Joseph, or Takakis. That's his actual name.
Yes.
In it, the land in which the Nez Perce had previously occupied was reduced to 11,700 square miles, and it was originally 27,000.
Oh my God. That's awful. Okay.
The Umatilla Reservation would be set up for the Nez Perce, Walla Walla, Cayuse, Yakima, and Umatilla tribes in Oregon Territory, and white men would not be allowed to live there unless they were part of the Indian Affairs Department. People outside of the tribe would be allowed to travel through the area on their main roads and highways and could use the rivers that ran through the land for recreational purposes. But fishing and hunting along the rivers was strictly prohibited to anyone outside of the reservation.
Okay. Sounds very placating. Still not very.
In return, the U.S. government agreed to pay $60,000, or $2.2 million today, in the first year after the treaty was ratified, as well as annuities each year to cover the cost of further cultivating and improving the remaining land, such as farms and housing. The government would also build and furnish 2 schools, 2 blacksmiths, 1 carpenter's shop, 1 wagon and plowmaker shop, a tin shop, gunsmith shop, 1 sawmill and 1 flouring mill, and a hospital. So they're whitewashing their culture a little bit by providing them all these things. The president also had the right to survey the land and break it up into lots anytime in the future for the members of the tribe, that the Nez Perce were to be friendly and accommodating to outsiders, and the Nez Perce did not want the use and sale of alcohol to take place on their lands. That was one of the few things that they argued for.
Yeah, I bet. I bet they already saw problems with it.
The Nez Perce also wanted to extend an offer to continue to allow William Craig, who was a close and trusted friend of theirs, to occupy land within the reservation. So they're like, we want to give this guy special dispensation to stay here. He does not work with the government, but he is a personal friend of our people's, so we want him to be able to be here.
That's really nice. Must have been very special.
They're like, okay, cool. And then in 1860, so 5 years later, E.D. Pierce, a prospector, discovered gold on the Nez Perce reservation.
Oh no. Fuck.
Which fueled a mad rush to settle on their land, even though it was against the law.
Shit.
As we've seen time and time again, instead of honoring the Nez Perce's rights to the area, the U.S. government reduced the size of the land that the tribe owned and occupied in order to allow settlers to mine the area. In fact, by the end of 1860, some 8,000 miners had settled in the area illegally.
That's awful. That is fucking awful.
In an effort to do this peacefully, The government spoke primarily with the bands of the Nez Perce who wouldn't directly be affected by this reduction in their lands. The tribes
Mm-hmm.
were ruled by a number of chiefs of the different bands, not just one main governing body like the US government, which was their first mistake.
Yeah.
So there are several bands within the Nez Perce. They each have their own governing bodies, and then they will
Mm-hmm.
convene as a whole as part of not necessarily a war council, but like one main gathering of all of the chiefs and the main leaders of the individual bands.
That makes sense. So kind of just like almost like a UN kind of a thing.
Yes. Yes.
Like we're all ruling our own people, but we're peaceful in general.
Some bands had adapted aspects of the ways the missionaries utilized areas of their land and took up farming and cultivating tracts of land, because at this point, some of the people within the Nez Perce had converted to Christianity. They did
Yeah,
welcome in
that
some of
makes
these
sense.
Protestant missionaries and
Mhm.
converted and were adapting to, and they were like, hey, you know what? It does make sense to grow our own crops because sometimes hunting and gathering isn't all that great. And so
Mhm.
we're gonna adopt some of these practices. But this new proposed treaty would concentrate on the area occupied by the Nez Perce to these areas that were actively being cultivated as farmland. So they were like, we're going to take the areas that are not already being modernized,
Mhm.
and we're going to have you guys just be in the areas that you're already cultivating. So
Mhm.
less than 10 years after the initial treaty, in 1863, a second treaty was put into place that greatly reduced the land allotted to them, going from 11,700 square miles to 216.
Oh my God.
Yep.
That's essentially like putting them on house arrest at that
Hmm.
point. How did they get away with that?
Well, we'll get into it. Known as the Thief Treaty, it confined
Yeah.
the Nez Perce to reservations in the Indian Territory of Idaho, Washington, and Oklahoma. So, for years, Chief Old Joseph maintained that this second treaty was never agreed upon by the whole of the tribe. In fact, only a third of them had signed it.
That makes sense. Like there's no way everybody would have said yes to this.
And he was quoted as saying to his son, Chief Joseph, quote, "You must stop your ears whenever you are asked to sign a treaty selling your home. A few years more, and white men will be all around you. They have their eyes on this land. My son, never forget my dying words. This country holds your father's body. Never sell the bones of your father and mother." End quote.
That oh, how heartbreaking and scary. How
Mm-hmm.
scary for the poor kid.
President Ulysses S. Grant did restore the Wallowa country to the Nez Perce in 1873 with an order that directed all white settlers to leave the area. But as you can
Mm,
probably guess, they did not. And in fact,
exactly.
more of them flooded in, which resulted in several murders of the Nez Perce peoples that were never prosecuted.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because they'd be the problem.
Mm-hmm. Chief Joseph, or Hinmato Yalakat, was named chief in 1877 following the death of Joseph the Elder in 1871. So the one that had
Hmm.
signed the initial treaty.
Okay.
He was born on March 3rd, 1840, in the Wallowa Valley in northeastern Oregon, son of Joseph the Elder, Takakis, who signed the original treaty in 1855. His name roughly translates to thunder rolling down the mountain, which I think is lovely.
Hmm. That is really pretty.
When his father converted to Christianity, he had Joseph baptized at the Lapwai Mission, where he was given the Christian name of Joseph. So essentially, Joseph
Okay.
Jr. At this time, so in 1877, Joseph was 37 years old, married, and the father of several children, only one of which, daughter Kapap Ponmi, survived infancy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would assume too, just with the amount of travelers and stuff, being sick was probably really, really, really common.
Yep. He was known as strikingly handsome and a skilled negotiator. Major Henry Remsen Tilton noted of Joseph, quote, "He is a man of splendid physique, dignified bearing, and handsome features. His usual expression was serious, but occasionally a smile would light up his face, which impressed us very favorably, end quote.
He's so pretty. He's so dreamy.
Now, here is where I'm going to go on record and say that although Joseph has been noted time and time again as the war chief of the Wallowa band of the Nez Perce, this honor had actually been bestowed on his brother Olcott.
Oh.
So Joseph was actually tasked with caring for the non-combatants of their band.
Okay.
So he was never a war chief.
Okay.
His brother was. But for the sake of the rest of the telling, I will continue to refer to Joseph as Chief Joseph.
Okay.
Because he's an integral part of the events that follow, and because that's what he's been known as. But he was not the actual war chief of the Wallowa band of the Nez Perce. Just putting that out there. So I am recognizing that it is wrong. I am acknowledging it right now before we continue the story.
Got it.
In 1875, General Oliver Otis Howard, who was head of the Army's Department of Columbia and a Civil War veteran, met with Joseph to discuss peaceful transition and relocation of the Nez Perce to the 1863 reservation. He later noted, quote, "Joseph and I became quite good friends," end quote.
I'm sure, because, like, you want to be kind to the people that are trying to help you move your people in as safe of a manner as possible, which I think probably didn't really seem possible at the time.
Mm-hmm. General Howard wrote to Washington advocating for the Nez Perce's claim to their ancestral lands. In it, he noted, quote, "It is a great mistake to take from Joseph and his band of Indians that valley. Possibly Congress can be induced to let these really peaceable Indians have this poor valley for their own," end quote.
That's amazing. How often have you ever heard a white explorer say something like that?
Or a member of the military say that.
Yeah. Like he was in a war. He was like, no, we need to learn. We didn't.
But before any sort of peaceful resolution could be agreed upon, in June of 1876, the battle at Little Bighorn took place, seeing the annihilation of General Custer and his command at the hands of the Lakota Sioux and Northern Cheyenne. As you can imagine, after this, the nation didn't have as much sympathy for the indigenous people.
Yeah, that happens sometimes.
Yeah. In May, against his wishes, General Howard was forced to enact the government policy that ordered the immediate relocation of the non-treaty bands to the Nez Perce Reservation on the Clearwater River by April 1st, 1877. So he was giving them like 30 days to get out of there.
Holy smokes, that's like no time at all.
No.
Especially in a country that is otherwise feeling very hostile toward these people.
He also greatly embarrassed the Nez Perce when he jailed Chief Tuhuhuzu, who spoke out against the relocation. He was like, "No, we're not going to go." And they're like, "Okay, well, you're going to go to jail."
Not a good look.
Those that had previously agreed to go, who were primarily those that had converted to Christianity, signed a treaty in 1877, while one traditional Nez Perce leader was quoted as saying, quote, "I belong to the land out of which I came," end quote. He's like, "No, I'm not going to leave." So I don't know if you're sensing it, but there is a divide amongst the Nez Perce as to who is cool with going and who is like, "Nope, I'm gonna stay here. This is
and
where
then
I live."
who's right?
Yes. So the U.S. Army got involved following an attack on white settlers on June 13th, when a few young warriors from the village of Chief Whitebird killed 4 settlers that they felt had mistreated their kinsmen. In response to this, a large party of U.S. troops and local volunteers were sent under the command of Captain David Perry. On June 15th, so 2 days later, those that refused to sign the treaty left under the leadership of Chief Joseph when the U.S. Army threatened to attack them and evacuate them by force if they refused to relocate to the reservation in Idaho.
Oh, that's not good.
So those who followed Chief Joseph, known as the Walem Watcain Band, included Chief Looking Glass of the Alpawe Band, Chief Whitebird of the Lamata Band, Chief Olacott, who was the real war chief, that was his brother, Chief Tuhuhuzu of the Pigani Band, and around 800 men, women, and children that were led west over the course of several months. So from mid-June to early October.
Oh my.
So this number included around 200 some warriors, 60 non-combatants, and a herd of horses and cattle that numbered between 2,000 to 3,000.
Wow.
So it's quite a big number, and they're hauling with them like all of their belongings.
Yeah.
So it's not like this was a covert operation.
No.
Chief Joseph had hoped that he and his people could find safety with their allies, the Crow. And it was that hope that led them to travel over 1,600 to 1,700 miles, or 2,575 to 2,735 kilometers, through modern-day Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana, with the United States Army following them in hot pursuit.
God, that wouldn't be stressful at all.
No. So the Nez Perce War was fought over the span of 5 months and consisted of Chief Joseph and a small band of 250 warriors, which included a small band of the Palouse tribe under the leadership of Red Echo and Baldhead. So they had connected with them after they left Nez Perce's lands. And during that time, they were able to hold off a force of 5,000 U.S. troops under the direction of General Howard, who had tried to initially
do it peacefully,
who tracked the warriors through Idaho, Yellowstone Park, and into Montana.
Wow. This had to have been such a heartbreaking situation for a lot of those people there, because it sounds like a lot of the veterans and like army men really kind of understood them and were kind of being forced.
I'm sure a lot of them,
to
especially
do the wrong thing.
Especially General Howard, like they didn't want to do this. Like they were like, this really sucks and we don't want to do this, but we have to do this because it's our job.
Yep.
I'm not saying that all of them felt that way, but I'm saying
Right.
that I feel like a number of them were like, this sucks.
Yeah. You can tell that there were a few that said no.
Knew they were in the wrong.
Yeah.
So on the morning of August 9th, the Nez Perce were attacked by Colonel John Gibbons, who led a troop of 184 soldiers in a band of Bannock scouts at a plateau known as Big Hole. So this is one of the first major battles. That morning, nearly 90 women and children of the Nez Perce tribe were slaughtered.
Oh, that's awful. So they just kind of raided villages, essentially, from the sounds of it.
They kind of caught them unawares early in the morning because they had been tracking them thanks to the Bannock scouts, and so they attacked them essentially at dawn.
How horrific.
And following this, the band entered the newly formed Yellowstone Park on August 23rd, where they were able to elude capture at the hands of Colonel Sturgis. And unbeknownst to them, the Crow, who had previously been their allies, were in fact acting as scouts for the soldiers that were pursuing them. And this is the tribe that they're trying to reach out to be like, can you help us?
Help us. That's so heartbreaking. But I bet they were probably like, if we don't do this, this is what's going to happen to us.
Yep. So after learning that the Crow would not help them, under the leadership of Trail Chief and military strategist Chief Looking Glass, who was a war chief, Chief Joseph, he changed course and he started leading them towards the camp of Lakota Chief Sitting Bull in Canada, who had fled there following the whole Custer incident of the Great Sioux War of 1876. So they were like, well, we're going to go to Canada and we're going to meet up with our friends, the Lakota. On September 13th, the group entered into another conflict with Colonel Sturgis and his men at Canyon Creek, but were able to fight off their advances, and they crossed the Missouri River 10 days later. Now, the tribe was just 40 miles or 64 kilometers shy of the Canadian border on September 29th when the group arrived at Snake Creek in the Bear Paw Mountains. Everyone, including the horses, were tired.
I bet. Those poor horses.
Well, they had been, just running themselves ragged since mid-June,
Mhm.
and this is the end of September.
Yeah, because, I mean, they were in hot pursuit for so long. Like, was it just a couple of days behind on average?
Yep. And knowing they were days ahead of General Howard's forces, they had started to move slower than before.
Mm.
And it was here that they were intercepted by General Nelson A. Miles, who had led a team of 520 soldiers and 30 Cheyenne scouts from Fort Keogh in eastern Montana. The following morning, September 30th, they started their attack. By October 4th, so 4 days later, Chiefs Olacott, Looking Glass, and Tuuhuzu had been killed. Chief Whitebird and about 50 followers slipped out under the cover of darkness to try and make their way to Sitting Bull's camp. They were like, we're going to try for the border.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, just under 300 Nez Perce would make it into Canada. And this includes those who willingly went to the reservation and then skipped out on the way there.
Mm.
Chief Joseph's daughter was among those who safely and successfully joined the Lakota.
Ugh.
After a 5-day fight, the remaining Nez Perce, which included 184 women, 147 children, and 87 men, found themselves outnumbered with no food or blankets in the freezing weather, and the majority of their war leaders were dead. Chief Joseph surrendered on the afternoon of October 5th, 1877. His quote-unquote famous speech was translated by interpreter Arthur Chapman and written down by General Howard's aide, Charles Erskine Scott Wood, and later published in a Chicago Tribune article. Quote, "Tell General Howard I know his heart. What he told me before, I have it in my heart. I am tired of fighting. Our chiefs are killed. Looking Glass is dead. Tuuhuzu is dead. The old men are all dead. It is the young men who say yes or no. He who led on the young men is dead. It is cold and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. My people, some of them, have run away to the hills and have no blankets, no food. No one knows where they are, perhaps freezing to death. I want to have time to look for my children and see how many of them I can find. Maybe I shall find them among the dead. Hear me, my chiefs. I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever." End quote.
That's so heartbreaking.
That speech has been hotly contested years later. So in reality, the only part of the speech that we are 100% sure actually came from Joseph is the line, "From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever." They feel...
that the rest was just like flowery propaganda?
Yeah, that they took some artistic liberties with the rest of it. But he for sure said that line.
That bums me out.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure he said something similar, but I don't think it was as romanticized as it later became.
Yeah.
Joseph later remarked, quote, "We could have escaped from Bear Paw Mountains if we had left our wounded, old women and children behind. We were unwilling to do this. We had never heard of a wounded Indian recovering while in the hands of white men." End quote.
Yeah.
The Nez Perce held their own after enduring 18 battles, skirmishes, and 4 major engagements with the U.S. military, including at White Bird Canyon on June 17th, where they killed 34 soldiers, and on August 9th in the Big Hole Basin against Colonel John Gibbon and 175 troopers, where they killed 29 soldiers and wounded 40 others.
That's insane.
The conflict saw the number of Nez Perce tribe greatly reduced. Although more than 260 U.S. soldiers lost their lives, more than 230 of the original 800 Nez Perce people that set out perished. And a good number of those were women and children.
What a waste. What a horrible, horrible waste. least.
Newspaper correspondent Thomas Sutherland described the surrender on October 5th as follows. Quote, as the sun was dropping to the level of the prairie and tinging the tawny and white land with waves of ruddy lights, Joseph came slowly riding up the hill. 5 of his followers walked beside him. His hands were crossed on the pommel of his saddle, his head bowed upon his breast. His warriors talked in eager murmurs, he listening and making no reply. The Indian camp lay in the lengthening shadows, and as the little group came up from the darkening valley into the higher light which showed their wretchedness, Joseph lifted his head and with an impulsive gesture straightened his arm toward General Howard, offering his rifle, as if with it he cast away all ambition, hope, and manly endeavors, leaving his heart and his future down with his people in the dark valley, where the shadows were knitting about them a dusky shroud. End quote.
Mm.
Following their surrender, the remaining members of the Nez Perce were originally supposed to stay at Fort Keogh in Montana to wait out the winter, under the promises of General Miles and General Howard. However, the commanding general of the army, General Sherman, overruled them, and instead they were marched 265 miles, or 426 kilometers, to the southeastern Montana Territory, where they arrived on October 23rd and stayed until October 31st. The able-bodied warriors were then marched to Fort Buford near the Yellowstone and Missouri rivers. The women, children, sick, and wounded would head out on November 1st in 14 Mackinac boats. So, like long canoes, essentially.
Okay.
Between November 4th and 10th, the Nez Perce traveled to Fort Abraham Lincoln and then to Bismarck, North Dakota in Mackinac on November 9th. On November 23rd, via unheated rail cars, they were sent on to Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, where, quote, the 400 miserable, helpless, emaciated specimens of humanity subjected for months to the malarial atmosphere of the river bottom, end quote.
Oh, awful.
As you can imagine, living conditions were horrible. And those who didn't pass away were taken to a patch of sand and sagebrush they called, and I couldn't find the translation for this, so I'm going to do my best.
Okay.
Akishpa, or the hot place, in northeastern Oklahoma in the Indian Territory, where conditions were even worse, which is saying something considering they were living in a swamp bottom before that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say though, like, I bet for some of those people who had never experienced heat like that or humidity like that, it would have been torture.
Mm-hmm. Many of the Nez Perce perished there from malaria and starvation over the next 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
In January 1879, Chief Joseph traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with President Rutherford B. Hayes and Congress to appeal for the return to his homeland. Quote, we should have one law to govern us all. All should be citizens of the U.S. Let me be a free man, free to travel, free to stop, free to work, free to trade where I choose, free to choose my own teachers, free to follow the religion of my fathers, free to talk, think, and act for myself, and I will obey every law or submit to the penalty, end quote. His requests were denied. In 1885, Chief Joseph and 149 surviving Nez Perce were relocated to the Colville Indian Reservation in Nez Pelham, Washington, even though he was promised that they would be allowed to return to their lands in Kuski, Idaho.
Of course.
2 years prior, in 1883, 2 old men and 27 widows and orphans had instead been escorted from Oklahoma to the reservation at Lapwai, Idaho. So a small fraction of his people were returned to the original reservation, while he and the others were sent to the reservation that they were supposed to be sent to back in 1863.
That's awful.
In 1897, Chief Joseph traveled once more to Washington, D.C. to plead his case, this time before President Theodore Roosevelt. And again, there was nothing that could be done.
Teddy, no.
He passed away in his lodge on September 21st, 1904, at the age of 64, in what he viewed as exile, and was laid to rest at the Nez Perce Cemetery in Nez Perce, Washington. Many officials and soldiers who fought against the Nez Perce in the conflict were impressed by their efforts, praising them for their bravery, military ability, and perseverance. Colonel Nelson Miles and General Oliver Howard were among the number that applauded their efforts and their justifiable resistance to the U.S. Indian policy.
Mm-hmm.
General Philip H. Sheridan was quoted as saying, quote, "We took away their country and their means of support, broke up their mode of living, their habits of life, introduced disease and decay among them, and it was for this and against this they made war. Could anyone expect less?" End quote.
Good question.
Colonel John Gibbon, who fought against the Nez Perce near the North Fork of the Big Hole River, was later quoted as saying that the war against them was, quote, "an unjustifiable outrage upon the red man due to our aggressive and untruthful behavior towards these poor people," end quote. I don't agree with calling him that, but
Yeah.
I appreciate his sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
Today, the Nez Perce tribe governs their reservation in Idaho at Lapwai, where they are one of 5 recognized tribes. As of 2010, they numbered 3,500 members, though almost 92% of them are white. 92% of the people that
Crazy.
live on that reservation are white.
Wow.
The reservation covers an area much, much smaller than they had originally occupied thousands of years ago.
Yeah, no surprise
But
there.
instead of 216 square miles, they now occupy roughly just under 1,200 square miles in the Camas Prairie region south of Clearwater River.
Still.
And although members of the Nez Perce tribe today have done what they can to adapt, the old ways are still being passed down to each generation through fables and stories, in addition to their colorful celebrations and ceremonies. The path that the Nez Perce were forced to travel has been recognized along the Nez Perce National Historic Trail at 38 sites located in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. Among these include Big Hole National Battlefield, Bear Paw Battlefield, as well as 4 sites in Yellowstone National Park: Nez Perce Creek, Otter Creek, Nez Perce Ford, and Indian Pond. And that is the Nez Perce War.
So heartbreaking. Because, like, there was never really a point, even when they were super upset and, like, rightfully so, where they were acting super aggressively or, like, in any way that another reasonable group of people would act in that situation.
Yeah, like they weren't actively doing anything that would warrant the aggression that was brought against them. Like in any of those battles, they didn't start the battles. They were responding
ambushed for, like, the majority of them.
Yeah, they were
Or
responding.
they were, like, responding to an ambush before.
Like they weren't actively being like, "Oh, we stumbled upon you guys. We're going to try and kill you now." No, they were very much just responding to the aggression that was brought against them. They just wanted to be able to exist and go back to their land.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and they even asked nicely.
Yeah,
and,
several
like,
times. Several
give
times
a
he
report
pleaded
as to why. Like, even like they Shark Tanked it.
Yeah, twice.
Yeah.
In front of 2 different presidents.
This is really heartbreaking.
Yeah. We'd love to hear from you, and there's a couple of ways you can reach out to us. You can email us at yeoldecrimepodcast@gmail.com, where you can send us story ideas, share any spooky stories you may have, fun gifts, or even just to say hello.
You can also reach out to us via snail mail. Remember mail? Our mailing address is Ye Olde Crime Podcast, P.O. Box 341, Wyoming, Minnesota 55092. Fun fact, we like to send out thank you cards with fun stickers you can't get at our shop, so it's worth the cost of a stamp.
And this week's podcast plug is the Sinister Story Hour podcast. These are the stories your mother never told you. Join Steph for the spookiest story time as she tells short tales of true crime, cults, or missing persons. It is part of the Darkcast Network, and we will have a link to it in the show notes. If you love the show, the best way to support us is to leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Good Pods, CastBox, Podcast Addict, and/or Audible. Links to all of these are in our show notes, Or if you're already listening on one of these platforms, you know what to do.
Oh, and while you're at it, shoot us a question you'd like to hear us answer on the pod. We'll give you a special shout out and address your burning questions all at the same time. The weirder, the better. Submit them via link in our show notes or shoot them to us in our DMs.
This week's listener question comes from our friend Carrie Ann, and she would like to know if you could only have one type of chocolate bar for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh no! I don't even know if I can answer this question. Genuinely.
I thought I had an answer, and then I was like, oh, wait, but what about this one?
Right. Exactly. It's like, do I want to just be safe and do like a mediocre chocolate for the rest of my life that I know I like just because it was a comfort chocolate? Or do I want to like only be able to have the good stuff forever? But like, what if the condition is it still doesn't matter how it's not like going to be more prevalent in your life just because it's the only one you can have?
Mm-hmm.
Then you could be screwed again. So I don't know. I'm stressed.
Well, I'll say mine. So I think here's the ones that I'm waffling towards.
Mhm.
Charleston Chew,
Mhm.
which I love,
Mhm.
but also Take 5. Because Take
Yeah.
5 has enough of a variety of things in it that it's very, very good.
I have mine now.
And those that don't know what a Take 5 is, let me look up what's in a Take 5. Take 5 bar is 5 layers of sweet and salty goodness that include crunchy pretzels, smooth peanut butter, salty peanuts, and sweet caramel. And then it's covered in chocolate. So I feel like that covers like all of the bases of like good things. Like it's got your salty, sweet, nice crunch, but it's also kind of like gooey, or Charleston Chew. And I think even though like peanut butter isn't really my jam, I think I'm going to stick with the Take 5.
Okay.
What's yours?
Kit Kats.
That's a good one.
Because of all the different flavors.
Oh, you sneaky bitch.
I know. I was really proud of that.
Because there are
See,
different flavors of Kit Kats.
yep. And they can all scratch different itches you might have with a chocolate combo craving.
Like the lemon one, there's the
Mhm.
strawberry one, the matcha green tea one.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a dark chocolate one.
The key lime pie one was pretty good.
Can I change mine? I'm changing mine to Kit Kat now. I'm going to
Yeah.
follow your rules of engagement, and I'm going to say Kit Kat because, God, I love me some citrus.
Yeah. I love a good chocolate wafer mix.
I know we probably cheated, but I don't care.
I don't care either.
It's a theoretical question. Whatever.
Yes.
All right. What's something good you'd like to share?
Oh, all of my side jobs are done for now.
Yay.
Yay! So last weekend we had the event and I had to do some audio and video editing, and none of the video had connected to the audio. So I had 16 presentations to match the audio to, and
Nice.
it took forever, and it made me like never want to look at a screen again ever in my life. So
Fair.
that's done, and I don't have to worry about anything with that until like next year in January. So I'm just really enjoying kind of getting some of that time back and not having to edit or download or upload or worry about sound for anything or looking up weird how do you spell certain disease states. I'm just reveling in that for the time being.
Nice.
Like I really enjoyed the event and the content, but I'm ready for a break.
That's fair.
What about you? What's one good thing?
I'm going to do 2 short things because one's kind of meh and the other one's kind of meh. But if you put them together, they're not so meh. So one is we got outside yesterday and we were doing a really good job of like cleaning up the yard. All the leaves are pretty much out of the yard in the front. Did a lot of mulching.
Nice.
For those who don't know, which is the majority of you, I have a lot of trees on my property, mainly in the back. So when fall comes, I have like a several inch thick layer of leaves that will accumulate in the backyard and sometimes in the front. So did a lot of that. Got to start a fire yesterday, which I miss doing fires in the fire pit. So that was really fun for me.
Nice.
I like fires. I like bonfires.
It was a good temperature for that too.
Mm-hmm. So that was good. I've also been reading, which is, I think I mentioned that last time, but I've been reading and
Reading for fun more.
reading for fun more, yes. And I read this book that I got at Pine Haven, of all places, which is funny. Let me look it up. It was a really quick read. It was like an independently published book. Monsters of the Midwest, True Tales of Bigfoot, Werewolves, and Other Legendary Creatures.
Ooh.
And it was funny because it covered the Thunderbird was in there, the Lawndale
Oh, nice.
incident from our Halloween episode. So I was like,
That's
hey, I
awesome.
talked about that. So yeah, I read that when my oldest was getting her haircut.
Sweet.
All right, shall we?
Let's do it.
Want to be social with us? You can see pics from this week's episode, bonus content, and funny memes on X at Ye Olde Crime Pod, or on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube at Ye Olde Crime Podcast.
Speaking of YouTube, we have a special playlist just for our Can You Crack the Cramp Word segments with our guest podcasters to see who can correctly guess the meaning of some obscure Victorian slang terms. If that's your thing, check it out.
And on that note, as always, I'm Lindsay,
And I'm Madison.
and we'll see you next time with another tale
As old as crime.